Hi everyone, so we are in lesson 19 today, and in lesson 19 we're going to draw kites and squares to clarify their attributes and define kites and squares based on those attributes. So we are continuing on with what we've been doing since lesson 16, but we are talking about two new shapes today. So I start with two questions for you. Can a rectangle ever be a rhombus? Can a rhombus ever be a rectangle? So we're actually going to answer these questions with our next drawing. Okay, so you may already be thinking in your head, well, let's see. They're both quadrilaterals. Okay, and let's see. Both rectangles and rhombuses are parallelograms. We've learned that rectangles have right angles, but rhombuses don't have to. Rhombuses must have 4 equal side lengths, but rectangles don't have to. Let's see. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by drawing a 3-inch segment on our paper. It's going to go from here to here. Okay, so I'm going to start there, and I'm going to label this A and B. And now I'm going to draw 3-inch segments, one coming off of point A and one coming off of point B. There we go. And my 3 inches is going to be right here. Okay. And I'm going to label these C and D, and now I'm going to connect points C and D. Okay, so if you are looking at our drawing, you probably are thinking in your head, okay, we've just drawn a square. Now in our drawing, we know that our side lengths are all 3 inches. We made sure of that. And if I went to measure each angle, I'm probably going to see that each angle is 90 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and label those angles. Now here's the thing. If these two are 90, we know that these top two are 90 degrees as well. Okay, so looking at our drawing, at our square, we can see that we have 2 sets of parallel lines. We have 4 angles that are 90 degrees, and we have side lengths that are the same. Okay, so we just have defined a square, but I also want to think about, based on these parallel sides, what is another name for this shape? We learned it at the very beginning, trapezoid. So the shape that we just drew can also be called a trapezoid because it has a pair of parallel lines, of parallel sides, I should say. We can also call this a parallelogram because it has 2 sets of parallel lines. When we measured the angles, we saw that it had 4 right angles and 2 sets of opposite equal sides. So these are the same and these are the same. And so we learned the other day that that defines a rectangle. And then since this is a parallelogram with 4 equal sides, we can also call it a rhombus. So if we return back to our questions up at the top, can a rectangle ever be a rhombus? Yes, a square is a rhombus and a rectangle at the same time. So when you draw a perfect square, you're actually drawing both a rectangle and a rhombus. So a rectangle can be a rhombus if it's a square, and a rhombus can be a rectangle if it's a square. So that new term, square, helps us answer these two questions. Okay, so if we want to think about the attributes of a square, let's go ahead and list those. So a square has 4 sides of equal length, 4 right angles, opposite sides that are parallel. And then here's some kickers. When it has 4 right angles, it is a rectangle. And those 4 right angles are actually going to imply then that it has 2 sets of parallel lines. When it has 4 equal side lengths, it is a rhombus. Okay, so a square, my goodness, has lots of attributes. Okay, so we're going to go back to our drawing and we're going to explore the diagonals. So if you remember from our previous lesson, we are going to go from point A to point D. And we're going to go from point B to point C. And then when you draw your diagonals, the question you always want to have is if they are going to bisect each other. And so when something bisects something, it's going to cut it into 2 equal pieces. So what we're looking for is if we measured from point A to the midpoint, it's going to be the same length as point D to the midpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and measure. And that is 2 and 1, it looks like 2 and, what was that, 2 and 1/16? 2 and 1/16. And so if I measure from the midpoint to D, I should see the same thing, 2 and 1/16. Now, in the square, what do you think point B to C? Do you think we're going to see the same measurements or different? When we did our rectangle, we had same measurements. So let's see if that holds true. 2 and 1/16. 2 and 1/16. Okay, 1/16. So we've now just seen that in our square, our diagonals do bisect each other where they intersect. And if we measured these angles, we're going to see what we find if we measure these angles, what their measurement would be. My guess is we're probably going to see a 90-degree angle. That's what we saw with our rectangle. And since a square is a rectangle, 90 degrees. And 90 degrees. So that kind of tells us a little something. When we drew a rectangle, we knew that rectangles, their diagonals bisected. We also knew that they formed 90-degree angles where they intersected. So since a square is a rectangle, it makes sense that we would also see those same things with the diagonals. Okay, so we can add squares to our list of new shapes. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stop the video. This will be mini lesson number 1. I'll come back with mini lesson number 2 to discuss kites.